what one thing do you find most spiritually uplifting?
Well, I think it's hard to choose one thing. There are many things.
Are there many things that have the same quality?
Yes.
Same.
Huh. Whoops. Well, let's see. Oops. All right.
Well,
spiritually uplifting. You know, it used to be something really inspiring that I read in a book, whether it be spiritual or metaphysical. The thing I find most uplifting recently is the confirmation that if I get quiet, things get quiet, and I feel basically happy. And that's uplifting to me.
Good for you. Well, when I think of things that are spiritually uplifting, it's easier for me to think about things that I find that communicate the transcendent to me, like the night sky and the ocean and things like that. But on a slightly larger scale, the thing that I find so spiritually uplifting is communications when it works. You know, whether it's a poem or opening someone's eyes to an idea, or finally getting it about something, that that flash of the self knowing the self, or or whatever it is.
Yes, that they sometimes call an aha experience.
Right. And yes, that provides really high moments.
Yeah, those remain important, I'm sure. And they're little gifts when they come. And then there's chocolate.
Yeah. And strawberries.
Well, there's chocolate. There are many paths to the divine. Might be strawberry for somebody.
Other voices?
These conversations.
Well, that's true. I overlooked the most obvious.
That was something to do with the point I was making about communications.
Yeah, it is related.
Although, Seda Madria, you so often speak of poetry, which is what so often works for me in terms of finding a taste of the transcendent.
Yeah, I mean the poetry and nature, poetry about nature, and poetry in nature.
Yeah.
Except, interestingly enough, when I'm not in nature, I want to read poetry about nature. But when I'm in nature and I'm reading poetry, I want to read about, let's say, the divine or something like that, if that makes any sense. I mean, I'm already in nature. I don't need to be reading Wordsworth while I'm at the top of a mountain.
Yeah, it makes sense. And nature herself, I'm sure, waxes poetic. It's just not in words. I'm still likely to be very pleasantly delighted sometimes when, for instance, I go out at night to take the trash, and there's a nice full moon, or it doesn't even have to be all the way full. And I look up at the sky, and all of a sudden it's magic. That's a nice one, you know, because it's part of the cosmos that we can perceive, or we can experience, or we can see reflected within us.
I think communication is very key. And for me, I don't see nature as a separate thing from communication, because just like poetry or being in a relationship with someone, that involves certain communication. Likewise, nature is always communing with us, whether we know it or not.
Wait.
Are you in the
outside?
wind?
Yes, I am.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, we can hear the wind sometimes better
I
than
love
you.
it. Yeah, it's absolutely cold, and I'm so tired of sitting inside. So I
Well,
thought,
sure.
spiritual upliftment. Let's take a walk.
Yes.
Yes, it's very, very cold and very windy, but you know, nature is just like us, always changing.
Yeah,
She's not in the
And,
wind, she's in nature.
that's right.
Yes.
The
Yes.
phone's in the wind.
Right. But yeah, I mean, everything is connected. Everything is in constant communication with every other thing. So, and I think that's what is spiritually nourishing, only when we realize it, that it's
Right.
always communicating.
Right. If you're not there, you miss it.
Yes.
Spiritual.
But I know that feeling of looking up at the night sky, certainly. That's
Yes. Yeah, if it's dark enough
consistently
where
does
I
it for
am,
me.
then the vastness is all the more obvious, and you know, when you can see a good nighttime sky with stars, that's magnificent, regardless of the moon. Sometimes better without it.
Indeed.
All right. Now let's have the converse of that. What's the one thing you find most spiritually demotivating?
Distraction takes my attention away from what I ought to be motivated about.
Excuse me.
You're in demand.
Like that one.
What?
I said you spoke of distraction, and look what happened.
Oh, yes, that's right. And there it is.
Nobody there. There was a distraction.
Yes, exactly. Not as much as it might have been, though.
I wouldn't say spiritually demotivating, but certainly a distraction. Let's see, what's spiritually demotivating? Small people.
Small people.
Yeah,
That's
I
not
mean,
very nice to the midgets out there.
now. I was thinking of smallness of character rather than.
You mean shallow?
No, I mean small. Shallow's forgivable, you know?
Yes, exactly.
So what's a small people?
Petty and egocentric.
Yeah, and closed in on oneself. You know, can't
Yes, good.
go out and meet any more of reality than they're already comfortable with.
Good phrase.
Yeah.
Yes, and not open. Fanatics come to mind. I again call on Churchill's definition of a fanatic as someone who can't change his mind and won't change the subject.
Right.
Ladies.
Well, I think this is a really good point, because I think I don't want to call it demotivating, but perhaps an obstacle is, you know, the rigidity to one's own perception. When someone is so rigid in what they think, in what's right and what's wrong, and they don't want to change their perspective or entertain any other perspective. That's what becomes the greatest obstacle to knowing what's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it certainly is. I hope I don't suffer from it much.
I don't think you do.
Well, it's a good question to ask, because there may be, little parts of us that are small and real and insensitive, even if the rest of us is pretty much okay. And one really looks to one's friends and to some sense one's spiritual community to say, I noticed such and such.
Right.
Do you really? Have you noticed that, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. Well, and you also, when you meet one of those small people, you have the opportunity to reflect and say, do I reflect that same thing at times?
Mm-hmm. Yes. If we were all just open and aware enough to ask ourselves these questions a lot.
Exactly. I mean, when you see it in somebody else, it can sound an alarm. And I think that alarm is a call to a little bit of self-examination.
Yeah, I think that's
good. I do that with the horrid drivers on the road sometimes. And I can usually find where I've done the same kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Takes the vitriol out of my reaction.
And that's a big deal.
That's good, yeah.
Patria?
I wouldn't say that it's demotivating, but a difficulty is anytime I see something that upsets me and frustrates me to an extreme extent, and the thing that I can think of that would be the worst and most egregious thing would be someone exhibiting cruelty to an animal. And when I see that, I have immense amounts of anger, but part of my spiritual practice is something I learned from the Buddhist. It's a form of loving kindness in which you pray for the souls of your worst enemies.
Yes.
And I can't think of a worse enemy for me than someone who's cruel to animals. And I find nothing harder in my spiritual practice than to not wish the eternal hellfire on people like that.
Yeah, but what a relief it is if you can switch that over sometimes to wishing they weren't afflicted with what they're afflicted with. And that's how you sort of have a prayer to help them.
Right. But it's difficult. It doesn't it's not demotivating. If anything, it might be motivating. It's just difficult.
Yeah. It's hard to let go of that indignant response.
In terms of demotivating, I think the thing that would get me out of the groove most is simply habit. I feel like I just have to sometimes switch things up. If things get stale, if the religious practice gets stale and stagnant, that's demotivating for me personally.
Well, yeah, I think it is for most.
And that's maybe one of the reasons why I've incorporated so much that most Orthodox Muslims would consider egregiously heretical. And that if I was living in, let's say, some Islamic country 1,000 years ago, I would be to have my head chopped off and then my body burned.
Yeah, you'd have to hide it big time.
Yeah, but it's what I consider to be positive idol worship, the worship of the beauty of God in the symbolic manifestations that God itself has placed on this planet.
Right.
And I think that that's a good thing. But for me, you know, that kind of aesthetic worship of God, the kind of thing that John Keats would talk about, has helped me a lot, because I have to say, for the first decade or so that I was Muslim, and even in the Tariqa, there was a certain sterility. And it wasn't helped by the atmosphere of the Tariqa. You have to remember, I never met Sheikh Isa, I was never around Bloomington, and I'm sure I would have various criticisms of certain things if I was there, but all I can speak of is the fact that the art and the openness to Native American forms was lovely, whereas the Tariqa for a long period was just basically academic speculation. And that does very little for the heart.
Right. And there was a pretty good amount of that in Bloomington too. It's just that some people let themselves be Indian once in a while, or so they thought.
You know, speaking of Bloomington, there's a story I heard once from, I believe it was from City Solomon in Canada. He said, you know, that he heard from someone anyway, that there was one time a group of Native American women visiting, and they were knitting or embroidering some fabrics. And some of the European/American convert Tariqa women came over and started lecturing the Native Americans on how they're all wrong and doing things the wrong way, and how they're you know, degenerate and modern, and need to act, and started showing them how the true Native American embroidery should look. And I thought that was rather ridiculous.
Yes. Never a good sign when you tell a Native American that they're not Native American.
Right.
Well, I don't know if that story ever happened or not, but it's true.
Yes, there is a kind of thing that describes.
So if your spiritual master was not a human but an animal, which animal would it be, and why?
I think that's a fascinating question. I'm not sure I have an immediate answer, but let me give it a thought for a moment. Anybody else?
Well, the only animal-looking spiritual connection I had was with Ganesh, and so maybe it might be an elephant. I mean, I don't really have any opinion on what kind of animal I'd like, except that it would be nice if it didn't bite and didn't stink, and, you know, a few things like that.
Maybe a snow leopard.
Yeah, maybe something magnificent. Yes.
Live. Thank you. Yes, a beautiful, noble animal gets to live in a beautiful place. I guess I could say the same if I wanted to be a whale.
Well, cats can be spiritual teachers at times, but I wouldn't
Yes.
I wouldn't expect to find a master there. Although I supposed that learning about something in its really natural state, that even the nonverbal behavior might contain teachings. Well, of course, the Native Americans looked there for teachings.
The one I would pick is actually far too cliche almost, but I'd have to say probably some form of an owl.
Ooh, that's wise. Owl is good.
Well, all right. Why an owl and not, say, an eagle?
You know, it's owl, eagle, falcon, all of them were going through my head at that time. I think any of those large birds that are able to really have that view of things, but maybe you know, I go back to the Greek myths that the owl is Athena's bird, or maybe it's the fact that it flies at night, as Hegel says. That there's something about that left-handed path or dark wisdom that appeals.
Yeah, and also there aren't too many animals whose eyes are that wide open, which is really captivating.
In T.H. White's retelling of the Arthurian myths, the once and future king, he actually Merlin transforms Arthur into any number of different animals, and all of them act as teachers in a certain way. And it's interesting that the one species that is viewed negatively, taught through an example of don't be like them, are ants. But that was written at the height of communism, so you can sort of understand where that was coming from. But the species that actually was, you know, viewed as like the highest teacher were actually geese.
And that's
because they're just, you know, peaceful, sort of libertarian, not really bothering other species, not really making a negative impact, work well together, but also, you know, have travel long distances. I mean, I think a lot of those things. I think penguins would have a lot to teach too. I've always been very enamored with penguins.
Yeah.
I think people could learn a lot from penguins.
Well, all you have to do is spend a lot of time with them. And it's kind of chilly, but yes.
I mean, think back on it. Not just Native Americans, but the Aboriginals from Australia or Mexico and South America, or any of the ancient peoples of Egypt and Greece and so on and so forth. They all had, in the earliest forms, animal gods. They all had spirit animals that guided them. And I don't think necessarily that one animal can be our ultimate master, but I think we can learn from the spirits of all of them. I think that wolves have something to teach us as much as the large cats, as much as crows or ravens. I just think we really should get back in touch with all of these things. Trees as well, stones, not even animate things, but you know, this one great novelist, John Cowper Paris, you know, he was criticized because he was saying that sometimes he would pray to a stone. And he said, you know, this stone is from God as well. The ancient Druids prayed before trees and stones. It exists and is not non-existence. Therefore, it has the heartbeat of God beating within it. And sometimes it does marvelous things for our spiritual practice to try to discover that heartbeat of God in the things you'd least expect to find it in.
Right. Well, and the stone can, in the right context, bestow upon you ritual purity.
Yes.
And the notion of it being connected with purity is not unrelated to being connected to God.
And at any rate,
I could
yeah.
almost say that I had prayed to stones too, some of those stone formations that really, really just moved me greatly. You know, I really did want to talk to them and ask them for things. And the Aborigines also, they had stone formations that were sacred, geographical locations that were sacred. So it's, and I'm sure that they found certain plants that were.
So what can we generalize about these things?
Wherever you turn, there's the face of God.
Yes, very good. Yes, they all embody qualities that reflect the divine.
Yeah, and you know, books in brooks and sermons in stones.
What's that from?
Shakespeare.
Oh. Yes, exactly.
Where, you know, these people are out in the forest and I forget how that part of it starts, but it's like, here we feel only the pain of Adam or something like that. And then it waxes eloquently about all the rest. It's praising nature and the natural world as being a spiritual teacher, actually. Is that in As You Like It? That's the name that comes to mind. I ought to know because I might want to refer to it sometime. I could always Google it.
Yes, well, it's certainly eloquent.
Yes. Well, yeah, a lot of Shakespeare's that way. But that's particularly nice.
All right. We talk a lot about awareness. What about a state of peace, stillness, and rest where one is not overtly aware of the outside world? Is that a good state to be in, and why? And if not, why not?
Oh, it's a very good state to be in.
Yeah.
And it's closer to being real or pure awareness because it's not awareness of anything. Once you get awareness of, you've defined a subject and object relationship, and real awareness is above or beyond that.
That's good. That's right. In fact, some of the conversation this weekend referred to some of those states. People, you know, spending years perfecting those states, and only to discover that state was right there available all the time. What was the other one besides Nirvikalpa Samadhi?
I don't know the...
I don't remember. I had never heard it before this weekend. Greg talked about it.
Well, it's in the text, obviously.
Well, you know, it may have been defined in one of those little notes at the bottom of the page. I don't know. Or maybe Greg just brought it in because it fit what we were saying.
But in many ways, that's the distinction being made there, too.
Did it start with something like Samraprajtana? Did it start with S by any chance?
I believe it did.
Really?
Yeah. So there are three, if I remember. And they're really hard to pronounce. But in Sanskrit, there's Samprajatana, and then there is Asma Prajatana. And if I remember this correctly, the Samprajatana is when we think outside, we think we're not part of the thought. So the thinker stands apart from the thought. And the second is when they both become, the thought and the thinker becomes one. Well, generally speaking, in Hinduism, those are the three types of samadhis, as in the states of enlightenment.
Right. Well, they have a number of them depending on who you're reading or where, what part of the Vedas.
That's right.
But there can be a lot of emphasis on nirvikalpa samadhi because it kalpa samadhi because it seems to be the highest possible thing because you're just gone and you don't know anything, but you get that in deep sleep every night. So what's the deal? I mean, you can't even return from it and say how good it was. When you get up in the morning, you can say, I slept well.
Other voices?
Saida Zainab, anything else?
I just added what I had to. I don't have anything else on this one.
Yeah, that'll do.
All right. Do you believe that democracy is the best possible political system? And if so, should spiritual organizations also be more democratic? Or is it better to have a hierarchy, in which case the secular world could learn from religious organizations?
There's a place for each. Now, who was it that said something like democracy is a terrible form of government, but is better than all the others?
Aristotle.
Really? Huh.
Yeah. I mean, those aren't his exact words, but that's the entire gist of his book, The Politics.
Well, then maybe I heard it quoted from somebody who was summing him up.
Well, then there's the statement that democracy is the form of government least esteemed by educated people.
Yeah, there's something to that.
That was George Washington.
Yeah. Well, then no wonder we're in the pickle we're in here politically.
No, that's the problem. We've become a democracy. We were supposed to be a republic.
Oh, well.
No, this is important.
Well, we don't have to ever stop being a republic, but we need to democratically elect our representatives.
Well, yes, that's right. We need to democratically elect our representatives, but we need to elect people who are competent and can do good jobs.
Yes.
But now we have a state where what the people we elect do is check the polls every day because it's all a popularity contest, because it's no longer a republic. It's a democracy. It's a pure democracy.
And it's no
Everybody
longer
has an opinion on everything.
And the leaders aren't really leaders because they slavishly follow public opinion.
Right.
You want somebody with real positive qualities and abilities and things like that to be representing you, not somebody who's just like you. You want somebody better. You should, anyway.
Well, I mean, Jefferson said that the role of the administration was to assure the population that the problems that faced them were solvable, that competent people were working on them, and that in the process, noble acts were possible. That takes competent professionals doing their job, not just people who respond to the polls all the time.
Yeah, they're not people that just tell you who to hate.
And one of the best arguments against pure democracy is the civil rights movement, which was passed over the objections of most of the country. That's the kind of thing you can do in a republic you can't do in a democracy.
Well, yeah. When it's functioning properly, yes.
Right.
I mean, you should want to elect representatives who know better than you,
right?
And give them some slack.
It all goes back to that famous story of the woman asking Franklin what kind of government he'd given us.
Yeah.
A republic, if you can keep it, ma'am. And I think that's getting to be the problem. Excuse me, phone call.
Yes.
No, no one there.
So, you know, I think even a lot of the worst things that happen in the 20th century are also partially due to democracy. We think of, let's say, Soviet Union or Nazi Germany as dictatorships, but they both started out from democratic fervor. They started out from putting too much power in the hands of the people. And, you know, having some sort of spiritual aristocracy might actually be the best thing. Lawrence actually wrote a lot on this, and I'm commenting on some of this in my book, but there's just this one paragraph here that I thought is particularly relevant. It says, "It is not man's weakness that he needs someone to bow down to. It is his nature and his strength, for it puts him in touch with far, far greater life than if he stood alone. All life bows down to the sun, but the sun is very far away to the common man. It needs someone to bring it to him. It needs a Lord, what the Christians call one of the elect, to bring the sun to the common man and put the sun in his heart. The sight of a true Lord, a noble, a nature hero, puts the sun into the heart of the ordinary man, who is no hero and therefore cannot know the sun direct. This is one of the real mysteries. As the Grand Inquisitor in Dostoevsky says, the mystery of the elect is one of the inexplicable mysteries of Christianity, just as the Lord, the natural Lord among men, is one of the inexplicable mysteries of humanity throughout time. We must accept the mystery, that's all, and to do so is not diabolical."
No, there's lots of mystery.
Good.
Yeah.
Just these days, it's basically like, oh, authority, that's evil, that's bad. You know,
The only thing worse is when everybody calls themselves the authority.
yeah. I mean, Machiavelli agreed with a lot of Aristotle. He would come down more on the side of some sort of aristocracy, but ultimately Machiavelli was saying democracy is the worst possible system, but it's the most likely to be stable. Aristotle said the same thing. Worst possible system overall, but least likely to be egregiously horrible. So, you know, any other system at its best is going to be better than democracy. The problem is that democracy has more checks and balances.
Yeah.
To prevent some of the worst things from happening. Whereas, you know, if you have, let's say, a mad king or queen, much worse things can happen. So, you know, the question is, if we want a better system, how do we have a hierarchical system without having the potential for it to degenerate into something terrible? And I think, as Sheikh al-Bashir, you're saying that's basically to a certain extent, the idea of a republic, balancing out the best aspects of hierarchy and some sort of influence from the public. But the problem is now in the modern world, when we have polls and social engineering and social media and nonstop 24-hour news and everything, how can we possibly have a functioning democracy when it's really just a popularity contest and a competition about who can, on one hand, manipulate the public more, and on the other hand, who can pour more money into the politicians and manipulate them? I don't think anyone in this entire system is lacking in manipulation, which is why, you know, to go back to someone like Plato, he says, the rulers should essentially be older people that are elders of the community, that don't have any particular need for power or wealth because they probably already have it. People that don't have any specific desires other than the overall good of the community, and make sure that they don't stay in power too long. So rotate the leader every so often. But
right. Well, in the Republic, wasn't he talking about finding accomplished or skilled or wise people and forcing them to serve for a certain period, like a kind of like a draft?
Exactly, because one thing that Plato believed, and I agree with, is if someone is of a truly philosophical mindset, the last thing they'll want to do is tarnish their spiritual and secular lives by getting their hands dirty with politics.
Yeah. Well, and for people like that, power is not generally something that has a legitimacy in itself. But they might get accustomed to it if you let them stay in there too long. It is a little like I wouldn't want to be a member of any club that would accept me as a member. I've always felt that way about politics.
It was a great theory. Everybody gets to vote. And we democratically elected the people who would serve and lead.
Yes, exactly.
But no one predicted electronic media in which everything could be a popularity contest all the time.
Yeah. And people didn't think that we would deliberately elect people who, rather than lead, will mislead. I mean, the idea that someone, like Trump, who is obviously a liar, and even his supporters know he does it, but they think it's bold and brash. The idea that you would elect somebody who's obviously dishonest. But that's, that indicates the degeneration of the culture. That people would lose the values that they should be voting. And the mass media doesn't help that.
On the other hand, since we're all coming down rather harshly on secular democracy, spiritual organizations in this country certainly have had huge and horrible abuses at the hands of authoritarian spiritual masters. And so, as much as I think that secular democracy could use a little bit of aristocracy, I think spiritual organizations could use a bit more input from, let's say, some of their members, because I mean,
I agree.
I'm all for a benevolent dictator or benevolent sheikh, but the problem is when new people come in and tell that sheikh that he's a god, and the sheikh starts to believe it and then starts to act like it.
Yeah. Well, there is that expression, and I don't think I have it right, but it's Vox Populi, Vox Dei, or something like that. Voice of the people is the voice of God. There's a place for that. And it's a sort of moderating force, because it isn't enough to convince one person. You have to convince a lot of people. And the amount of inertia that the masses have means that you can't usually take them too far too fast. And the people can also tell you whether what you're doing is any good for them. Is it working?